So usually it says, okay, great. Now we're getting, I think we captured all of that, but I wanted to make sure.
All right.
We're back at SUNY Albany with Salome Raheim. We're talking about her journey, a snapshot of the wide expanse of her journey with social work as a professor in particular to help frame social work in a mind, body, spirit perspective. So we were just talking about that and how in ways that's so progressive for social work in a way. Like has mind, body, spirit always been a part of social work?
Absolutely not.
It hasn't.
One of the hallmarks of social work is being integrated. And what that means, unlike a biomedical model, is looking at the person in the context of the environment, which is so important.
Critical.
So social work has been on the leading edge of that for a long time. And now the integrative practice adds to that because it recognizes the nuanced interconnection between mind, body, and spirit in ways that haven't been recognized in the past. For example, the body in social work practice has largely been ignored beyond creature needs. So, of course, we always understood from the very beginning of the profession, people need enough food to eat, they need a place to stay, and they need to be able to handle their health concerns. But the intelligence of the body that we are coming to know, now this of course is ancient wisdom, but it hasn't been a part of professional practice in most of your more conventional fields, and helping people to tap into the wisdom of their own bodies, be connected to their own bodies. That's an example of something that is new that integrative practice brings. So the average person who is not involved, let's talk about social work. In social work practice, and in social work training, there's not been any focus on helping students to learn how to listen to their own bodies, much less teach others how to listen to them, their own. So the question, well, how does it feel in your body? It's like,
what body?
Well, what do you mean?
Right.
So,
and how is that relevant?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So just an example of how integrative practice takes that person and environment context in a step further and takes us to another level of connection and integration and looking at harmony and balance to promote wellness. And again, this is not only on the individual level, but this is also on the group and community level as well.
Right, and to be able to teach and cultivate those capacities as social work students,
Yes.
I mean, it's like the perfect setup so that they start to understand how to connect with their own bodies, know what's going on. Social work is such a high burnout rate, so it's so relevant. I mean, it's so relevant for so many reasons. Balance, harmony, I love that you use that word. And that, like you said, you can't work with other people to be having them pay attention to their bodies.
Right.
If you really don't have some comfort and connectivity with your own.
Right. And the way I like to look at it is this is a whole skill set that we haven't been accessing that we can now access for our own wellness as practitioners and to advance the wellness of those that we serve. And you mentioned burnout, and that's a critical issue in social work, particularly in specific fields like child welfare. And when social work practitioners can learn how to take care of themselves and recognize that it's not an indulgence, it's a requirement to be effective and to last long in this work, then we can really help students and support practitioners in doing that work. And I don't think there's a school of social work in the country that would not say that self-care is important. But saying it's important and giving the tools and encouraging their use, those are different sorts of things. And so I'm really excited about being able to advance integrative mind-body-spirit practice in social work education.
And that's part of why you're here at SUNY Albany, because there's an opportunity to really open that up, build some infrastructure around curriculum. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of what your vision is and what you would like it to look like?
Okay.
You know, because I think that this is going to be so interesting for people who are, you know, in other social work programs or either in administration or whatever to help them think about what it could be. And you're at the cutting edge here, so I think people need to know what are some of those visions.
Yeah, I'm excited about the opportunity that I have here. So the first step, what I'll do this semester, and this is my very first semester actually. This is day 13.
Day 13. She was so generous to have us.
Oh, this is a beautiful way for me to start this journey. So the first thing that I'll do this semester is develop an advanced social work practice course in integrated mind, body, spirit practice. So that's just so exciting for me. And previously, when I was at the University of Connecticut, I developed a course with a colleague whose name is Jack Liu. We co-designed an integrative mind, body, spirit social work course. It didn't teach students how to, it wasn't a practice course, it was more of an introductory course. So we included yoga and acupuncture and mindfulness, meditation, and other kinds of meditation, and biofeedback, and family constellations.
Okay.
And focused on self-care and had students meditate in class and those kinds of things. So
how was the receptivity to that? Like, what did students think about it? Like, was it sort of like uncomfortable for people? Was it? I mean, because people aren't necessarily expecting that yet.
Well, it was an elective course.
Okay, so there
students
was that
got to self-select.
Yep.
And I'll never forget what one of the students said in some written feedback. She said, "I am over the moon that I am able to take this course as a part of my graduate studies."
Over the moon.
Over the moon, can't get better than that.
I know, that's the best.
So what I will do here is a course that has some of the similar foundations and but certainly a similar philosophical foundation, and teach students how to carry this into their practice and give students an opportunity to learn a particular modality.
Oh, okay.
So that they'll have a choice. At least this is what I'm thinking.
That's what
I haven't developed it.
Right,
yet.
that's what we're talking. This vision, what you would like to happen, right? Like, what do you think would be effective?
They would have a menu to choose from so that they could focus on one thing that they could develop some skill in to take into their practice. But of course, just a modality isn't the point. You've got to have access to some modalities and access to people who know modalities, so various modalities, so that you can do referrals.
That's right.
But what is as important is the practice model, so that they know how to engage the body, not to leave the body out of the equation, how to engage the mind, and to bring spirituality into it as well, which is a critical component that's been ignored in a lot of professions. Social work is beginning to, over the last 20 years, has begun to incorporate spirituality, but it's still not we still can't take for granted that it's really integrated into the curriculum in the way that is important. So that's first semester, develop and teach this course, which I'll be doing during the summer. I'm so excited about that.
Yes.
The broader vision is to establish an institute for integrative mind, body, spirit, practice, education, and research.
I just feel so excited. I mean, this is cutting edge. This is pioneering the world of social work. And you all are getting this right at the front end of this vision.
And I'm so glad to have this opportunity to share it with all of you. It's something that I'm very excited about, and just to have the opportunity to do this at this point in my career, this is what I want my legacy to be in social work and in the world with my professional life. As you mentioned, I've been at this for a while now, and there's nothing that I would like more than to make a lasting impact in social work, so that we really incorporate this mind, body, spirit framework. And so let me just talk a little bit more about the vision.
That would be wonderful.
What this institute would do would bring together the university, a variety of disciplines that have interest in advancing well-being, human well-being, from a sociological, educational, neuroscientific, social welfare perspective, and connect with practitioners who are doing the work, and the practitioners and the university professors could blend their knowledge and their skills to do research,
this is unprecedented.
Training. I can't wait.
This is unprecedented. You're talking about being in contact with holistic health practitioners, mind, body, spirit practitioners, and potentially developing partnerships and collaborations with university to do research, to do application, to do exploration, to do probably community projects.
It gives me chills.
I know.
To hear you repeat it.
Right? I mean, this is it's so obvious, and yet, of course, right, this is where we are in this moment, which is the deep integration of all of your wisdom on your path in the 40 plus years of your journey, and your own personal journey, which I'm sure has been about mind, body, spirit, right? Which is part of probably what's driving this, is how much maybe it's had an impact on you. I would imagine you wouldn't feel so passionate about it if it's coming through. So it's like this nexus that's coming together, and you have this institutional that says, we want this here, and we believe in this, and you have a vision, and you have something, you have all these competencies that you weave together, and let's do this.
That really excites me. You articulated that so perfectly. And one of the competencies I bring to this is being able to be a bridge.
Yeah, I can feel that.
And
say more about that.
That's what I'm excited about, because I've been in academic life for a long time, and almost equally long I've been into mind, body, spirit practice, either as a person who is receiving services, and then first as a person receiving services, and then later as a person who was able to provide services. And interestingly, in that early part of my life, those two worlds for me were very disconnected.
Very separate.
Because I got pretty clear messages in the institution that I was in, that things related to, at that point, spirituality. And we don't do that here. So, if you want to get tenured, don't talk about that. Don't even research that. do other things that are more acceptable. But all the while, I knew what was keeping me sane and well and balanced. I had learned meditation, and I was meditating somewhat regularly, as you do.
As most of us.
Yes.
Somewhat regularly.
I had learned about energy work, and I was getting Reiki treatments and other kind of energy clearings and energy medicine. I was getting acupuncture treatments, not necessarily all at the same time, but this is a long.
Yeah, you explored a handful of modalities, and they were having some impact for you.
They were absolutely having impact for me, and I knew particularly the meditation, that when I was feeling overwhelmed, when my life as a graduate student, or because I'll get to that part of my life in a minute, but there were times that I was teaching, and I was also a graduate student. I was also working on my doctorate, and I had 2 children, and at one point in that process, I was a single parent, and all of that is a recipe for losing your mind.
Okay.
And all of these healing modalities that I was able to access, practitioners I was able to go to, or things I was able to do for myself, they were really keeping me grounded and well. But still, I'm on these 2 separate paths. And then I learned how to be a practitioner. So there was so I got Reiki training, and I got mindfulness meditation training. Still these 2 separate paths.
And you felt like you couldn't even really talk about this at work?
No.
Right.
And I also, and this is part of where being a bridge builder comes in, I also at that point didn't appreciate what the academic arena could bring to advance these modalities. And maybe even at that time in my life, which was a couple decades ago, there was less openness than there is now. So, but then something happened. I was a dean. I was the dean, as you said, at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work. And of course a tenured professor, because they kind of go together. And I still, felt that reluctance to be out about the kinds of things that I was doing.
Right, and you're kind of in charge at this point.
And I'm in charge.
Right, but you're like, you had got conditioned enough. The system was
exactly
right. Like,
exactly.
There's a lot of fear around it, taboo. You didn't. I'm just the. Even though there wasn't risk, that risk doesn't go away.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I remember very, very clearly the moment when I asked myself, "What are you afraid of?"
Wow.
And I kind of did this assessment. I've got the credibility. I'm in a position of power. I had been dean long enough, maybe 3 years, so that I had credibility, not just by position, but people knew that I was competent, and I knew what I was doing, and I was respected both by my faculty colleagues and my other dean colleagues in the administration and all that. And so I asked myself, what are you afraid of? And it was all the things that you were saying. It's that conditioning that we get when there are these power differences. And it is significant that I am an African American and that I'm a woman. So that when I'm in this first African American, as you said, to be dean, and that of course links to a long history of oppression in this country.
Historical trauma.
All of that.
Yep.
And I have reflected, for example, that my grandmother, who I grew up with, when she was, the age that I was as dean, she would have only been allowed in there as a housekeeper, probably. So as custodian. So all of those things come together. But I asked myself, and I was able to understand that the things that had stood in my way, they were really no longer barriers. They didn't have to be barriers for me. And it was time to step out and bring these two worlds together. Now, external factor that really helps is that science has caught up.
Yeah.
So the science on specifically mindfulness meditation, because that's the one that seems to have been easiest to study, it's clear that there are benefits. It's clear that it's not any of the things that the detractors would say that used to be said about practices that weren't Western mainstream. So there's a research evidence base, so people can't dismiss it out of hand. And there's an evidence base, this great evidence base for yoga, and there's an evidence base being built for a number of what I'll call
yeah, we're so good.
Okay. And another way that science has caught up is that we know things from neuroscience now that we didn't know before, so that but it's neuroscience and some other areas as well. So from psychosocial genomics, from psychoneuroimmunology, and other areas of neuroscience, we know things about the mind-body-spirit connection and that we didn't know before. And so given those scientific discoveries, some of the studies that have been done, it really is an easier time to bring some of these practices forward and bring them into academic institutions, and to be able to teach students how to do these things and to incorporate them in their practice. If we're talking about training social work students or psychology students or medical students, medicine is ahead of social work, and nursing especially is ahead of social work. Now, I'm not saying that it's widespread, but it's not unusual to find an integrative nursing program or an integrative medical program or medical center. And social work is getting there. There are lots of social work practitioners who are using these modalities and have an integrative approach. So I don't want to. I want to make clear that that's already happening.
Yes.
What's not happening is that this knowledge is not being integrated into social work education, and it's as I'm not saying it hasn't been, because some places are doing it, but it's not standard. It's not a standard part of the curriculum across the country, and I would like to help that happen.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's what you're doing. You can see it, like you know it. You know it in your body.
Yes, I do.
And I can feel that, and it just feels like, how could you not do that at this point?
Yes.
And I want to also just rewind and just thank you so much for pausing and telling us the story of that moment of, you said, what am I afraid of?
Yes.
I feel like that, sort of in a more global sense, is such a moment where people are in their journeys in general. And I think yours specifically was so powerful because you had come so far, you had all of the right degrees, all of the right things in place, the respect of your colleagues and all of that. And so I think if any of us can get to that point where we can actually ask ourselves that question, whatever that takes, right?
Yes.
It might mean this pile of evidence that, like, I think I made it, whatever that means. And we even have that question pop in, which is like, what am I afraid of? It's such I just want to invite everybody out there to pause with that question today. As far as like what your big vision is, and your big dream, as far as what's in your heart, because this is a moment in history where we need people more than ever to be asking that question in a deep way and in a brave way, and to be supporting each other to, you know, going past that fear in whatever way works for you, because there's so much medicine in our visions.
Oh, yeah.
And there's so much medicine in this vision, and how when you were able to sort of say, this is what I want to do, and it's going to come through, and then your path opened up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Once you sort of said, this is what, okay, I'm ready to kind of come out around being a, you know,
Yes.
you know, things got really probably shifted pretty transformatively.
They absolutely did. And there's power in the vision, and there's power in the narrative. And
Okay.
I want to talk about that
Great.
a little bit,
Love
because
to hear it.
how we tell our story to ourselves and to others can make the difference between being an empowered person who can go forward with our own vision and being a person who is relegated to the margins because of the dominant narrative that's out there that says, oh, that's kind of where you belong. So trying to think about where in the story I'll start, and I think I'll start at the beginning, but I'll try to tell it with only the essential details.
Great.
Okay, so I grew up with my grandmother and my two sisters. My parents were young and off trying to do what they needed to do to survive. So this happened all in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother had grown up in what we call the country, so in rural Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And she accessed folk medicine. She accessed healing through prayer. She really had an integrative approach.
Right, as so many did back then. Mm-hmm.
And I, in case I didn't say it before, an integrative approach also includes conventional, biomedicine. So if your arm is broken, get it set, and if your spleen ruptures or your appendix ruptures, go get an operation. Right.
Right. It's all.
It's all of it. It's
That's
all.
right.
It's not one or the other. So
Right.
I just wanted to say
Well, it's
that.
a key piece actually, because the divide has been so strong for so long. So.
Yeah, and so bringing it together is really important. So she was very integrative in her approach.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I go to school from probably a very young age, what we get schooled in is that if it's in a book, it's important and it's real, and those kinds of things that you learn at home, that's kind of backwards. So if it's based on the scientific method, then we can depend on it, and if it's not, then it's superstition and we should leave it alone. And so I was schooled into not valuing my grandmother's ways. But as a young adult, I started having experiences that science couldn't explain. I started having dreams, and the dreams would happen. I mean, I would see, they wouldn't be, there was no big crisis, nothing foreboding, but just something simple like seeing a cat run up a tree in a dream, which I had never seen before in my waking life. And then sometime next week, that's exactly what I see. And so I started searching to find out, what is this about? And actually, that's what led me to learn about meditation and intuitive healing, and all of those things brought me to energy healing and approaches that the academic world had told me weren't, that they weren't valid. And so, and I've already told the part of the story where I'm in academic institutions, I'm keeping these two lives that I'm living separate. But then as I find out, as I learn through my academic training, both as a graduate student and more study as a professional about the operations of oppression, I recognize that part of what is going on is that not only am I engaged in these practices that are not accepted and actually are scorned in an academic institution. But I'm also African American, and at this point I'm in a predominantly white institution, University of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And so that legacy of slavery and the legacy of not being good enough and having to prove yourself and having to make sure you speak properly so people don't question your intelligence, all that's also operating.
Absolutely.
And there's also a dominant ideology this is really, I should talk about historical trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's the historical trauma not only as an African American, but also as a woman, because women who did some of the kinds of things that I was doing had been burned and stoned and drowned. So all of those things were coming together as a part of the weight that was on me.
Mm.
So fast.
Can I just pause you right there?
Sure.
How did, what's one way that showed up for you? Like, did it show up in your body? Did it show up in your belief system when you got to a certain point where you wanted to grow and you had like an old belief from like I can't do this, or as a just like, I mean, I know it's so obvious how it shows up for so many people, but is there like an example you can share about just because I think some people, historical trauma is can be such a such an interesting idea, and I think we're all working with it within our lineages, but it's not always, if we don't have an understanding of like our lineage, our cultural lineage, as a woman or as a trans person, where we grew up, the oppression that's happened, like it can pop up in our life, something that happened to our great grandmother, or something that happened, in our lineage a couple of generations back. And I think as a healer, sometimes it's been a really interesting thing to feel something like that come into the room for somebody, and how to name that, and how to even notice that, oh, this isn't just yours. This is actually bigger than you. It's because people think, why am I so messed up, or why is this anxiety? Like, there's not good reason why I'm so anxious. And part of what I've really been excited about in my own healing journey as a practitioner is being able to help illuminate that historical trauma is always in the room.
Yeah.
Those ancestors where those traumas happen, like we need to put some attention there, and that's not always the easiest thing to first understand or even get.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for speaking to that, and if you have anything else to say about that.
I've got a story about it that is, it came up in my family constellation work, because I'm trained as a family constellations facilitator. But it didn't come up in my facilitation. It came up in my own personal work that I was doing. So this is a very, very personal story. Very painful experience, but historical trauma. It's very painful. So the work that I wanted to work on was, I just wanted to feel a greater sense of connection, internal connection. I wanted to feel my feelings more. I wanted to be more aware of my body and the sensations in my body and how that might translate. I wanted to be more perceptive. Okay?
And it sounds like deep in connection to your experience in your body, in your being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm so thankful for the facilitator that I had. And what I was seeking could sound like the trauma of abuse, right? So the facilitator actually had me go through some a process to kind of check. I mean, he didn't say what he was doing, but to see if it was abuse, and it wasn't any personal abuse that I had experienced
in your lifetime.
In my lifetime.
Yeah, it wasn't an experience in your lifetime, right?
And so he just got the hit that it could be related to slavery. And he set up this process in which I won't go through all of the details, but I'll just say that when he set up the people who were doing when he set up the constellation for me, and it was a constellation about slavery, the moment people got in place and he had one person repeat some words to another group of people. Actually, the person who was speaking was representing a slave owner, and the people that he was speaking to were representing a group of female slaves. The moment that those words were spoken, I felt it so deeply, and I began to wail uncontrollably.
I can feel it now.
And some people who don't understand constellations or don't understand historical trauma could say, oh, well, she was just identifying with blah, 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 something in the past. But it was not that. I've read about slavery. I've read some horrible things about things that happened to my ancestors, and it wasn't that. It was in that moment I had really tapped into that historical trauma.
And you knew that because you could feel it.
I knew it because I could feel it. I could feel the pain of it. I could feel the pain of it very, very deeply. And I am not a crier, or I might be now, but I generally was like really kind of stoic, and that was part of what I was trying to address,
break through.
In Constellation. And oh my God, did I break through it? And then it was, of course, in Constellations you're not left in that painful place, but that was a real breakthrough for me, because not only did it address the issue that I had, that I said I wanted to work on, but clearly I was able to address that piece of very, very deeply held historical trauma. So, yes.
And is there anything you want to say about sort of after doing such a deep piece of work, which is both about you and your family, what would you say that, what's one way that showed up afterwards after doing that work in your life? Like,
a much more ease of being in my body, feeling my feelings, feeling difficult feelings, because with my long history as an academic and as a social worker, I can do this quick thing with feelings and just kind of move on. But I wasn't really necessarily dealing with them. I wasn't fully feeling them. I was kind of trying to move over them as opposed to moving through them. And now I can move through feelings in a way that was not as easy for me to do before. And not only that, I'm able to perceive. I have a different kind of body awareness than I had before. I am able to feel in my body in ways that I didn't really so much.
Didn't have access to before.
No.
That's so,
that was powerful stuff.
I know, and I just want to tell everybody, we're talking about family constellations, and we're going to have more about that in about a week and a half with Rainey George.
Oh, good.
I'll be down interviewing her because it's such an exciting modality. There's so many things to say about it, and I want to thank you for sharing that piece for a variety of reasons.
Oh,
historical
my
trauma, but also bringing this really epic transformational modality and that not enough people know about.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that your work is going to help inform people about it, because it is absolutely transformative work. So I want to get back and wrap up what I was saying about the power of narrative.
Yeah.
And so through all of the journey that I was talking about up to the point where I left off, I was the narrative was that I had to be guarded, and these two worlds needed to be kept separate, and the threats to my credibility were too great, and these worlds didn't really belong together anyway. And the academic world is really limited because it won't deal with this, and I will only pursue these healing modalities and talk about these healing modalities with others who are, like mine and so forth. And it's not that there's not a piece to that, the credibility piece that I was talking about, but still there were some things about my narrative that were helping to keep them separate. And I was seeing myself in a pretty disjointed way. I was this over here in the academic world, and I was this over here in my, healing world or spiritual world. And then I had this moment when I began to see myself differently. And what happened, and as a result of family constellations work, no doubt, I began to pay more attention to ancestors and lineage and my role in that. And so rather than seeing myself in this disjointed way, I started seeing myself as a woman who was a part of a lineage of healers. And as I started out talking about my grandmother, and I just had this epiphany. It's like, oh, I'm not this just out here by myself, living this disjointed life.
Right, this other.
Right. I am a part of this lineage of women who heal. And
love that right there. You just see with your hands,
Yeah, that's what it felt like. It brought my life together.
Yeah.
And so I actually did a conference presentation. It was my coming out conference presentation.
Wow.
I did this presentation in Australia at the International Narrative Therapy Conference. The title of the presentation was Grandma Was a Healer, Reclaiming Subjugated Narratives. And I talked about, and so this is where I fashioned and crafted and shared this new narrative about myself, that I was a healer. I came to see myself as a healer in this long line of healers, and like my grandmother, I was a seer, and I had dreams that happened, and I was intuitive, and I know things that don't come from my intellect, and I did all these different kinds of healing, and that was what brought it all. That was the narrative that brought it all together for me. So having a new narrative is powerful. A narrative that tells your story in an empowered way, so that you're not the victim. Not that there aren't victimizing circumstances, but you're not a victim in that narrative, and then you claim a powerful position, and it makes the narrative even stronger when you share it with others who then begin to reflect it back to you. So narrative is really key, and it's important that each of us develop and look at the narrative that we are telling. Lots of times it's a narrative that has elements in it from the dominant ideology that disempowers us in certain ways, especially if we have identities that have been historically marginalized. And then we get to craft a new narrative that, you don't do it out of thin air, but in my case, I looked at my lineage. This was not an intellectual process now, but the intellect has a role in helping to shape it. And so that's something that as we tell a new story that empowers us, there are lots of ways to tell any story. So tell it in a way that advances you and empowers you.
Well, I mean, I think that's such a beautiful invitation for the audience as a tool, right? Like how powerful it was for you, and it recognizes that there are victimizing circumstances, oppression is real, and how to be able to own, sort of acknowledge and be honest about that story, that experience, that history, our own and our lineage, and sort of step into the present moment with, okay, so this is all true, and how do I want to tell a story about it that includes this, and that also feels like I am speaking from a place of truth and power, and ultimately, hopefully, accessing liberation within oneself, and the liberation that's always been there in the lineage, actually.
Yes.
Right. It's not even though there's been stark conditions.
Yes.
You wouldn't be here if there wasn't liberation.
That's right.
In the threads.
That's right.
So it's
liberation and power.
That's right.
And determination and persistence and all of that.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what you have to do. There are many. One of the ways to look at things that there are many truths. There are many ways to a story can be told, and it's just important to access those subjugated narratives, those subjugated aspects that, like you say, those things that you mentioned have always been there. So I can tell the story of I can tell the story of victim, or I can tell the story of being in a long line of people who survived and thrived despite oppression. We all have access to that.
We all have access to that.
We all have access to that.
Yeah. And is that like, go pick up a pen, start paying attention to your dreams? Like, how would somebody take the first step in sort of thinking about how to write or speak their narrative? I mean, I know it's like a very personal process for everybody.
Sure.
For you, it was like really acknowledging and visibilizing your lineage and allowing it, and but it's just such an exciting invitation for people to help.
Yeah, there are so many ways
Great.
to go about it, and one thing that people could do is to begin to listen to what their current narrative is, and interrupt any narrative that they're telling that paints them as a powerless victim. And in the days that we're living in right now, that is really critical.
Yeah. And difficult.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, for some.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
To get to a place of power, feeling so disempowered, but it's like working that edge.
That's right.
To take responsibility for your story and the life you're living, whatever the circumstances, while working for change.
Exactly. And we all have to work with whatever we can access, right?
Right.
And one of the things that I did and I began to share with other people as political events evolved in this country, and there was a certain there was depression, there was just feeling really bad about how things had developed, right? And then I was able to get to the point where I said to myself, my ancestors, they managed through worse times than this. I can vote. I have a lot of freedoms that they didn't have. As a woman, I can vote. As an African American, I can vote. I am fully a citizen. That doesn't mean that people like me aren't experiencing oppression. It doesn't mean that there are some horrible injustices and violence that have happened because they continue to happen. But I'm in a position that I can act. So, I mean, and they could too, but they had much different circumstances. So I was able to reflect on the circumstances of my ancestors, reflect on the current circumstances and say, oh, we got this.
Okay.
We got this. It's going to take time. It's going to take some determination, but we cannot wring our hands and say, oh my, what are we going to do? We got this. So we just have to act like we got it and look at what we have to work with, look at what kinds of actions we can take and take them. So, and that doesn't mean that it's not okay that folks felt depressed. Some people still feel depressed, but there is hope. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that, I'm not saying that concerns people have. I'm not saying the concerns aren't valid. I'm just saying that whatever it is we're concerned about that, could happen, may happen, we got this.
Don't get stuck there.
Don't get stuck there. Thank you.
Don't get stuck there.
That's right.
The reactions make sense.
Yes.
It is scary.
Yes.
For some, for different reasons. What's going on?
Yes.
And don't get stuck there, right? Which is actually, I mean, speaking about the body, it's a neurobiological reaction, right? To go into fight, flight, or freeze. With an overwhelming sense of fear, and so it's going to take voices and visionaries like you and like in all of our communities. And I love so much that you spoke to the remembrance of what folks have gone through so that we could be here having this conversation.
That's right.
So if we're going to try not to get stuck, if we think we can just feel into, not even think about, but feel into the determination, the bravery, the courage, the sight that folks had, ancestors had to get us this far. There's so much we have to draw upon.
That's true, and I just want to say that that's true for all of us. I draw on my African American ancestry because that's what I have to draw on. I draw on my lineage as a woman because that's something else I can draw on as well. But people who don't have that have something, because if people who are Native American, obviously there's so much to draw on because there's been so much oppression, but people are still here and are doing what they can to move forward. And I just want to give a shout out to the Standing Rock victory. That was just incredible. And so there can be victories despite the power dominant institutions. So Native American ancestry, people have something to draw on. People who are Irish, they're people called hell. They have something to draw on. Anybody, no matter what your background, your ancestors have gone through something, and you're still here to talk about it. You are the beneficiary of their struggles. I go so far as to say that you are the manifestation of their hopes and their dreams. So we all have something that we can pull forward from our ancestors and from our lineage to help us move forward and help us have the courage and the hope to move forward, because our ancestors, no matter who they are, they went through some stuff.
Yeah, almost unimaginable for us.
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. And
everybody's ancestors have gone through
That's
stuff.
Right. That's right. We all got that struggle in our DNA.
Yeah, and this is just an opportunity to say, and this is for people who I just want to address whiteness for a moment, because the whole concept of whiteness and identifying with whiteness can separate people from their lineage. Because nobody who came here, when they came here, none of the, so of course, I always like to acknowledge our Native American brothers and sisters who were already here. So anybody whose ancestors came from someplace else, they didn't come as white people. They came as Irish people and Scottish people and English and French and Lithuanian and German and Ukrainian. But then when people get here, and as the ideology of racism developed, whiteness as a concept that grew out of that. So I say all this to say that it's important for people to be able to access and acknowledge their ancestry, which isn't white, because white is not an ancestry. It's a concept that grew out of the ideology of racism, as I said. So
white is not a lineage.
It's not a lineage. And so I'm just encouraging people not to let whiteness and the perception of whiteness as being something that's it's politically real, it's ideologically real, but it's not real in terms of being able to reach back into your particular ancestry and acknowledge and be aware of all that one's ancestors went through in order to draw strength from that.
So white people, that is our job. That's one of our jobs, to heal our own lineage, to help our own lineage heal, and to understand what it's even. We sort of think, oh, those people have the lineage, and because we've been sort of this whole term of white, we've sort of bought it, and we sort of think, oh, then I don't have that. I don't have that background. And it is absolutely not true. I want to thank you for speaking to that today, and that we all can. I mean, it's interesting being adopted. That's a real interesting one for me as a white person, because the lack of access to lineage, in the sense of being able to ask my family about it, is not available. So in the mind-body sense, I want to say, as a white person, part of what's been available to me is feeling into my lineage. Right? I've had to kind of feel into my own DNA through my body and my spirit. And there's always a way, because the lineage is so powerful. It's in our blood, it's in our bones, it's in our being, and it's coming out all the time. So even if you don't know what to do, you just you can just feel into our lineage and feel the struggle, and the liberation is available.
Oh, I'm so glad that you made that point. That's so important. That's so important, and it's so real. And when you do the family constellations piece, there's I'm hoping that your audience will get even more those for whom what you just said was like, huh? Even more how it is possible to feel into something. I mean, family constellations isn't the only way, but it is a very it's one modality that will allow you to access things you don't know, but you can see it played out before your eyes.
It's exciting, powerful, shocking.
Yes.
The whole gamut. So we're going to talk more about family constellations in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
I feel like there's so much more to talk about.
There's always more.
And I feel like this is probably want to start to wrap up for time's sake.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that I don't have a million more questions.
And doesn't mean that I don't have lots more that I could say.
I know.
I think this is good for now. I feel like we've covered a lot of territory. And I just want to say how much I appreciate that you are doing this project, that you've invited me to participate. I've loved this conversation. It's been strengthening to me. In narrative practice, there's something called witnessing, and in a certain way, you've been a witness to, and you've reflected back for me some things about my journey that really strengthened me, and it's very, very affirming. And I also want to say thank you to anyone who's listening right now, and both those who are listening live and those who may listen in the future. I just encourage, I just wanted to thank you for listening, and also to encourage you to follow your own vision, and use the opportunities that are around you to get the support that you need, so that no matter what the dominant story might be, that you can write your own story, so you can do what you want to do with your life and participate in the transformation that we're all a part of right now.
All right. Way to wrap it up. Y'all, thanks for listening. Whenever you join us, wherever you're from, I want to thank Dr. Salome Raheim for your time, your vision, your courage, your expertise. And, I have a feeling that Hive Live, we're going to keep doing it. Maybe not every day like I'm doing it right now, but we're going to keep doing it over the next year or two. So maybe we can pop back here in a year and hear how things are going with the Institute.
I'd love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So thank you again. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.